The Vraks brought 300,000 soldiers to a ritual war zone to exterminate a primitive species. Humanity responded with one man, a suitcase, and a 5-minute countdown. They stopped laughing at minute 1. They stopped breathing by minute 5. They laughed when he stepped onto the ash-black battlefield. No armor. No weapons. No army behind him. Just a man with a coat too long for the wind and a suitcase clutched like it carried the fate of the stars. Is this a joke? Jakar's voice cracked across every frequency. The Vraks warlord's mandibles clicked in amusement as his towering image was broadcast to the entire Council of Ascension. One human? One? The crowd of intergalactic observers erupted in static-filled chuckles. Over 200 alien races, watching from orbit or remote chambers, sipping their synthetic nectars and puffing on vapor tubes, as a single Earth-born stepped onto Aurelian Sigma, the war stage. Commander Grave Solen said nothing. He simply walked forward, bootsteps slow, deliberate. The soil beneath him hissed with residual plasma decay, ashes from 1,000 other battles fought on this cursed surface. The Vraks had brought 300,000 soldiers, battle-suited and clawed, armed with multi-spectrum blades, rage-inducing pheromones, and biochemical cannons. Earth sent him. Jakar stepped forward from his war barge, his obsidian armor glinting with the blood of past victories. "Speak, human," he barked, voice amplified by a chorus of war beasts. "Give us your species' final words." Grave opened his suitcase. Click. A soft whirring sound followed, like a dying whisper. A smooth, black sphere rose into the air, floating inches above his palm. It pulsed faintly, silver lines webbing across its surface, alive with something far too old to belong to mankind. Jakar frowned. "Clock me," Grave said softly. The Council's timekeeper AI, embedded in every listening device, beeped once. 5 minutes. Jakar waved his claw dismissively. "Crush him." The first Vraks wave surged forward. 15,000 elite drones, snarling, armored, genetically engineered for blitz tactics. They charged across the field, dust exploding beneath their clawed feet. Grave didn't move. The orb pulsed. The first line of Vraks warriors dropped. No blood. No wounds. Just bodies collapsing mid-charge, clutching at their heads, screaming in frequencies the translator AI refused to parse. Then the second wave fell. And the third. In 6 seconds, 40,000 soldiers were on the ground, writhing or dead. Some twitched. Others begged for silence in broken tongues. A few tore at their own throats. "What sorcery?" Jakar stepped back, antennae twitching. "What have you done?" Grave raised his eyes for the first time. "I gave them clarity." Council chambers worldwide fell silent. On a relay ship, an Arcturian delegate whispered, "Are we under attack?" The neuroresonance spread. In orbit, 3 Vraks dreadnoughts dimmed as crew members lost neurocontrol. The ships spiraled, crashing into each other with zero warning, no distress calls. Just void. "You're using banned tech," snarled the Zeltari representative. "This violates Council Codex 9. Grave tilted his head. "That would imply I'm playing by your rules." Jakar roared, summoning his prime guard, a personal unit bred from Vraks' royal bloodlines, immune to psychic interference, armored with anti-signal plating. They descended in formation, surrounding Grave. "Kill him!" The guards moved fast. Grave didn't flinch. The orb pulsed once. The guards froze. One blinked, then exploded, his armor crumpling inward like paper sucked into a vacuum. The others fell in succession, their systems corrupted from within, bodies convulsing as unseen data burned through their neural cores. The Council's observers began exiting en masse. "No," Grave said, his voice cutting through all frequencies. "You stay. You watch." Jakar snarled, but now his voice lacked conviction. "You think this is war?" Grave asked, eyes narrowing. "This is a lesson. You brought ritual. I brought reality. You brought death." "No," Grave corrected. "I brought truth." Jakar growled, lunged forward, and slammed a 3-ton plasma halberd into the ground where Grave had stood, except Grave was no longer there. He stood behind him now, untouched. "Your army," Grave said, "is gone. Your fleet? Crippled. The AI gods you pray to can't hear you anymore." "How?" Shakar whispered. Grave leaned closer, his voice low, hard. "Because we stopped evolving to win wars. We evolved to end them." Shakar turned to strike. The orb pulsed. He froze. Then dropped. No explosion. No blood. Just stillness. A warlord turned to dust, armor and flesh disassembled molecule by molecule, scattered into the wind. The council timer beeped again. 5 minutes. Grave closed the suitcase. Silence blanketed the battlefield. Nothing moved. No insects chirped. No machines hummed. Just ash and echoes. Grave turned toward the floating council cameras. "Earth accepts your surrender." And with that, he walked into the dust, leaving only a crater where once a civilization's pride had stood. No victory celebration. No speech. Only a legacy, etched into the minds of every species watching. Humans are not weak. They are what waits at the end of your arrogance. The orb hovered midair, pulsing a steady silver thrum like a heartbeat no one could trace. Above Aurelian Sigma, the skies shifted. Vrax's dreadnoughts darkened. Systems failed. Sensors scrambled for explanations that didn't exist. The silence wasn't just tactical, it was surgical. Deliberate. Shakar stared at the dying feed from orbit. "Status update," he snapped. "What's happening to my fleet?" No response from command ships, Lord, one of his adjutants stammered. "Our transmissions are looping." "Looping?" "They repeat the same second, on endless playback. As if time's fractured." Shakar's jaw clenched. "Bring in the second wave. Now. No more games." Across the scorched field, Grave Solen stood still, the orb calmly humming above his palm. He hadn't moved since the first wave fell. His coat swayed in the wind, and around him, bodies remained twitching in the dust, some whispering madness, others already gone. "You do realize the Council is watching," Shakar said, taking a step forward. "You've violated 17 warfare protocols. Earth will be sanctioned, your species quarantined, your systems dismantled." Grave's reply was soft. "Earth didn't send me." Shakar blinked. "What?" "I wasn't chosen," Grave said. "I volunteered." The ground beneath Shakar's command platform shuddered as the second Vrax wave deployed. 200,000 soldiers in full mechanized armor. They hit the field like a meteor storm, stomping over their fallen comrades without pause, without question. Their marching formed a living wall of rage, reinforced by tank beasts, seismic destabilizers, and sonic blade drones. They advanced, blind to what had come before. "Now you die," Shakar growled. Grave looked at the orb. 3 minutes remaining. The pulse changed. Not louder, just deeper. It vibrated in the bones. The air around the battlefield shimmered. Light bent wrong. Shadows twisted in directions that didn't obey suns. The first tank beast exploded. No weapon touched it. Its armor simply collapsed inward like its atoms were rethinking existence. Then the drone swarm dropped mid-flight, spiraling to the ground, their AI cores melted from inside out. Then came the screams. The soldiers halted mid-charge. Some dropped their weapons. Others tried to claw off their helmets, clawing at invisible things. Those who pressed forward started convulsing as their own suits turned against them, locking, constricting, crushing. One soldier raised his rifle. It turned to dust in his hands. Another screamed in a frequency unknown to any known life form before his chest burst open, no blood, just white ash spilling out. Shakar stared in disbelief. "What is this?" Grave spoke, his voice reaching every ear without amplification. "We warned you. For centuries humanity was mocked, labeled barbaric, underdeveloped. But we never chased war. We studied it. We perfected it. You're not using weapons," Shakar spat. You're using sorcery. No, Grave said. I'm using understanding. He pointed at the battlefield. Your species evolves for conquest. Mine? For adaptation. Your strength lies in numbers, ours in insight. You brought a war from 1,000 years ago. I brought tomorrow. The second wave collapsed. Bodies littered the field. 5 entire legions, gone in 30 seconds. Council envoys watching from secure orbit began murmuring. Some screamed. Others demanded evacuation protocols. But the orbital feeds were corrupted. All Council ships in local space had gone dark. Unresponsive. Blind. On the Council Prime Station, Chancellor Ortal raised a trembling hand. This is no longer a sanctioned engagement. This is an extinction event. But no one dared interfere. Not anymore. Jakar's breathing turned erratic. His armored plates flared red with stress heat. You think this makes you powerful? You think this makes humanity safe? Grave tilted his head. I don't care about safety. I care about certainty. You're a monster. No, Grave said, eyes locking with him. I become one, so my people don't have to. The orb pulsed again. Jakar's platform shook violently. Entire chunks of the battlefield cracked open, revealing ancient circuitry beneath, deep veins of alien architecture glowing silver blue. The Oubliette Protocol was not a weapon. It was a buried civilization. Impossible, Jakar whispered, watching the planet light up. This isn't human. It's not, Grave admitted. It predates all of us. We found it. We listened to it. You tried to enslave us with history. We rewrote it. Jakar activated his personal phase teleporter. He landed 10 meters from Grave, claws extended, venom sacs primed, muscles flaring. I end this myself. Grave didn't move. Jakar lunged with a screech, moving faster than any human could track. His claws struck the air where Grave stood, and froze. Mid-swipe. The orb hovered between them, pulsing once. Jakar's arms disintegrated, not violently, but like they were never there. His body followed, unraveling cell by cell. His eyes locked onto Grave's. You are evil, he rasped. No, Grave replied, stepping back. I'm human. And Jakar was gone. The field went silent. Not just quiet, but void. The kind of absence where sound fears to tread. Then the AI voice rang out across every channel. Engagement complete. Duration 4 minutes 59 seconds. Grave turned and walked away, the orb folding itself neatly back into the suitcase. He didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. Behind him, 300,000 corpses rested on soil that had already begun to absorb them, reclaiming their atoms into the Oubliette system. Council fleets across the galaxy entered lockdown. Earth's ambassador received 23 offers of surrender from rival systems within the hour. No response was given. The war was over. And the galaxy finally understood. Humans weren't the underdogs. They were the endgame. A soundless wave rippled across the battlefield as the third minute began. Not wind, not vibration, something deeper. Reality itself shuddered. From beneath the surface of Aurelian Sigma, obsidian cracks widened and bled light. The ground pulsed like a waking heart. Symbols, ancient and fluid, climbed from the dust, spreading in fractal patterns that defied geometry. Council observers didn't recognize the language. They didn't need to. Every translator AI returned the same phrase. You were warned. On the orbital feed, Council representatives argued in terror. Chancellor Ortal demanded immediate recall. The Galari delegate accused Earth of heresy. Others simply prayed. Below, Grave Solen stood unmoved. The resonance orb floated above his open palm, pulsing with increasing tempo. His eyes glowed faintly now, not with energy, but with something worse, certainty. The kind that only comes from knowing you've already won. Do you see now? He spoke calmly, not just to Jakar, but to the galaxy watching. This was never about strength. It was about comprehension. And you've been playing with spears in a world of stars. Lies. Jacques roared from his second dropship, now perched atop a mobile assault rig the size of a city block. You hijack ancient weapons and dare call it warfare? Grave tilted his head. You call it war. I call it warning. Jacquard's voice boomed across all frequencies. All surviving forces, converge. Annihilate the human. Scorch the field. Dozens of Rack's high commanders obeyed. The remaining legions, nearly 70,000 strong, regrouped. Their command drones rebooted under emergency fire protocols. The assault rig's seismic cannons aligned. Massive energy coils began charging. The air thickened. Electric. Hateful. Grave closed the suitcase with a soft click. Then, he knelt and touched the soil. The ground screamed. Tendrils of black light exploded outward, seizing tanks, beasts, soldiers. Where the tendrils touched, metal fractured. Minds shattered. Whole war machines turned inside out. Screams burst into static. Bodies twisted in reverse and vanished before their echoes caught up. The cannons fired. Nothing hit. Each beam, solar-grade, antimatter-tipped, simply vanished mid-air, dissolved as if the universe had decided not to allow it. Shockwaves rippled outward, tearing apart the Vrax's own forward bases. Jacques watched in horror as his best were unmade. You don't understand what you're using, he screamed. I do, Grave replied coldly. That's why it works. In orbit, Council dreadnoughts began listing. Engines flared randomly. Gravity fields collapsed. One vessel cracked in half without a sound, its halves drifting apart in perfect silence. Internal crew logs showed no sabotage, no external hit, just mass desertion of reality itself. Below, the resonance orb fractured. It didn't break, it unfolded. From within, a second sphere emerged, pulsing white-hot, not with light, but information, raw intelligence, data spinning faster than thought. The Oubliette Core. Jacques knew the name. All elder races did. The core was a myth. A doomsday device left behind by the architects, those who made stars and walked between singularities. No one had ever found it. No one survived those who tried. Until Earth did. You fused with it? Jacques whispered. No. I became its choice, Grave replied. It woke when it heard our voice. Not through war, but wonder. Not conquest, but comprehension. You're not human anymore. Grave's eyes flashed. I'm what happens when humanity gets time to listen. Desperate, Jacques activated the rig's core weapon, a continent splitter designed to shatter moons. He shouted one final order. Fire! The sky turned red. The beam carved through clouds, lighting the heavens, bearing down on the single man still standing calmly amid the apocalypse. Then it stopped. Midway. The beam bent. Curved. Then reversed, folding back into the rig that had birthed it. The explosion leveled 10 kilometers of ground, except for the spot where Grave Solen stood untouched. Smoke cleared. Ash settled. The rig was gone. Nothing remained. Not even slag. Only Jacques on his knees, armor melting. You cheated, he croaked. You cheated reality. Grave stepped forward. No. I rewrote its terms. Jacques coughed, blood and static mixing from his mouth. What do you want? Witness, Grave said. Not surrender. Not praise. Witness. To what? Grave pointed skyward. To what you never bothered to understand. The core pulsed once more. Above, a rift opened, silent and massive. From it spilled images, memories of Earth's struggle, not its triumph. Children staring at stars, scientists deciphering collapsed particles, diplomats laughed out of council rooms. Wars fought without credit. Genius drowned in dismissal. You thought us primitive, Grave said, voice rising. Because we grieved. Because we hesitated. Because we questioned everything. He stepped closer. But we listened. And when the stars whispered back, we didn't conquer. We learned. Jacques stared at the light above. You were waiting. Yes, Grave said. We waited. We warned. You mocked. Jacques fell forward, the last of his breath stolen by fear. The battlefield stilled. No wracks remained. No soldiers. No screams. Just silence. Then the final signal from the core transmitted itself across the Council's entire network. A single encoded message, burned into every translation AI, etched into every language processor, stored in every listening device. Humanity is not a species of war. They are the species you unleash war upon only once. Then the core vanished. So did Grave Solen. No flash. No fade. One moment he was there. The next he wasn't. As if history had closed the page it had briefly opened just for him. In the silence that followed, the galaxy adjusted. Council laws changed overnight. Earth was granted untouchable status. Access to its space was forbidden. Research on human history was sealed. The word, Solen, was flagged by intergalactic systems as a Class A anomaly. No empire challenged Earth again. Because war is loud. But what humans brought was the final, terrifying quiet. The countdown ended with a whisper. Not an explosion. Not a scream. A whisper. 5 minutes, Grave Solen said. The battlefield lay still. No movement. No survivors. What remained of the Vrax army was ash, scattered in perfect silence across terrain that no longer felt natural. Cracks in the soil pulsed with fading light as if the planet itself exhaled, relieved that it could stop pretending to be a war zone. Above, the orbital fleet had vanished. Council sensors confirmed what their eyes refused to believe: 300,000 Vrax soldiers, dozens of warships, and a high warlord, erased within the span of minutes. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It was a memory, dissolving. From the shadows of the council chamber, voices tried to form meaning. Are we under attack? One delegate stammered. No, Chancellor Ortal said. This wasn't an attack. Then what was it? A statement. The council attempted damage control. Sanctions were proposed, accusations hurled, but no response came from Earth. All communication signals sent toward the Sol system returned corrupted, scrambled into strings of unparsable code that no algorithm could crack. Earth had gone dark. And that silence spoke louder than any declaration. In the aftermath, the Council initiated emergency protocols. A new clause was added to the Galactic Codex within 72 hours. Humanity is exempt from all future war declarations. No species shall engage, provoke, or observe their martial capabilities under penalty of dissolution. The clause passed unanimously. Among the votes was the Galari Archon, who once called humans soft-spirited primitives. He now kept his homeworld's orbit empty for 3 months out of fear Earth might visit in return. But while bureaucrats panicked, the galaxy's people whispered a different story. A story of one man, one suitcase, and 5 minutes of war that ended everything. His name was whispered like a ghost. Grave Solen. The Phantom Warlord. The human anomaly. No one knew where he went. The council reviewed the feed 1,000 times. He walked across the field, closed the suitcase, said nothing more, and disappeared. Some believed he'd been a weapon himself. A construct. Others believed Earth had bonded with something beyond understanding, technology older than the stars, perhaps even alive. But the humans said nothing. No interviews. No broadcasts. No celebrations. The Earth government released one message. We regret the escalation. It was not our intention. We will remain neutral. Please respect our boundaries. But the galaxy remembered. In time, monuments appeared. Not built by humans, but by aliens. A massive black obelisk erected on Aurelian Sigma's ruins bore no inscription, only a countdown etched at its base, 005. Above it, a hovering sphere identical to Solen's orb rotated endlessly. Scholars came to study it. None could touch it. Many who looked too long into the sphere's shifting light began weeping. Others fell into a silence they never recovered from. Some tried to weaponize its design. All attempts failed. Each ended with systems rebooting into an unbreakable loop that repeated only one phrase. You were warned. One cycle later, the Vrak's dominion collapsed. Without Jakar, and without the fear that held their vassals in line, the empire splintered. Civil wars erupted. Territories defected. Their species, once dominant, became fragmented, reduced to scattered colonies. Some fled to the edges of known space. Others simply gave up. A refugee broadcast caught attention years later. A young Vrak's child, no older than 9, stood in front of a shattered hive and said, "We should have listened." It became the most translated sentence in council history. Meanwhile, Grave Solen became myth. Children told stories about him. Some saw him as a monster. Others as a savior. The truth became less important than the fear. His name meant one thing. Limits exist. And humans found the edge. Back on Earth, hidden beneath layers of silence, a chamber deep below the Pacific Ocean housed something quiet. Resting. The suitcase. Unopened. Untouched. Unreachable. A single AI watched over it. It had one directive. Do not open unless spoken to. Above, in a remote station, an old man looked at the stars. Wrinkles carved into his face like maps, eyes still sharp. His hands, once covered in blood and brilliance, now rested on a control panel that hadn't been touched in years. Do you think they've forgotten? A younger voice asked behind him. He smiled faintly. Not a chance. Then why stay quiet? Grave Solen didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, watching the endless black beyond the glass. Because the loudest power, he said finally, is the one that never needs to speak again. A soft tone echoed through the station. A council transmission, coded as low priority, a ceremonial invitation to a peace summit. Grave read it once. Deleted it. No response was necessary. The galaxy had already heard what it needed to. And it would never forget the sound of war when humans finally spoke it back. Quiet. Clean. Absolute. In 5 minutes,